What if your school day was all about learning how to argue perfectly? What if numbers held the key to understanding the heavens? Did you know medieval students way back in the Middle Ages chased something called the 7 liberal arts to become truly educated? Number 14. Echoes of the past. How these arts shaped us. Centuries have passed since the great cathedrals of learning first taught the Trivium and Quadrivium. Yet, the echoes of those 7 arts persist in unexpected corners of our modern world. Careful deconstruction of arguments, a skill owned through logic, finds a place in legal practices and scientific research today. The structured expression of ideas, cultivated by rhetoric, is seen in public speaking, political discourse, and even advertising. Grammar. The foundation still dictates the clarity of communication across languages and digital platforms. Patterns of number theory explored in arithmetic underpin computer science and encryption. Geometric principles guide architecture and engineering, constructing the very buildings we inhabit. The understanding of musical structure, once a deep philosophical pursuit in music, continues to influence composition and music theory, shaping how we experience sound. Astronomy, once a study of celestial bodies for divine understanding, evolved into the bedrock of space exploration and astrophysics. Path through these arts was not just about acquiring facts, it was about shaping a certain kind of mind. Students who mastered these disciplines developed the capacity for rigorous thinking, for articulating complex ideas, and for understanding the order of the cosmos. The medieval emphasis on these foundational skills means that even without a direct line, the habits of mind cultivated in those ancient classrooms continue to influence the ways we learn, reason, and create. Scholars sometimes speak of a mental grammar or a logical scaffolds that underpins much of human inquiry. These are not new inventions. They are refined versions of the ancient arts. The legacy of the 7 liberal arts remains a quiet but powerful force, a testament to a system of education that believed in a fundamental way of understanding the world and expressing that understanding. Number 13. Beyond the classroom. The impact on society. The knowledge gained within the walls of medieval universities and cathedral schools did not stay locked away. Graduates of the 7 liberal arts programs stepped out into a world eager for their skills. Many went on to higher studies in theology, law, or medicine, using their foundational arts as crucial tools. A scholar of the Trivium, skilled in Latin and logical argumentation, was well prepared for the intricate debates of theology or the precise language of legal codes. A student who had delved into the quadrivium could apply their understanding of numbers and patterns to practical challenges. For example, those strong in geometry might contribute to the construction of grand cathedrals, calculating angles and supports for towering arches and domes. The meticulous planning of a building, documented in historical plans like those for Wells Cathedral in England, required a deep understanding of spatial relationships. Individuals trained in arithmetic often found roles in burgeoning trade and commerce, managing accounts and understanding complex financial transactions. Their knowledge of number theory, while abstract, could translate into practical systems for tracking goods and wealth. Students of rhetoric often became prominent figures in both church and state. They served as royal scribes, diplomats, or legal advocates, crafting persuasive arguments and drafting important documents. Their ability to speak clearly and convincingly in public forums was highly valued. Priests and bishops, many of whom had completed extensive liberal arts training, used their skills to interpret scripture, deliver sermons, and administer justice within the church. The intellectual rigor fostered by logic permeated scholarly discourse and became a hallmark of learned debate across Europe. The influence of these educated individuals meant that the liberal arts did not just shape individual minds, They shaped institutions, governments, and the very fabric of medieval society, providing the intellectual infrastructure for an evolving civilization. Number 12. The grand purpose, what it all led to. For a medieval scholar, mastering the 7 liberal arts was not the end goal itself, it was the crucial preparation for something even greater. The entire curriculum was designed as a stairway to higher wisdom, a meticulous process of preparing the mind for the most profound truths. Once a student had thoroughly absorbed the Trivium and the Quadrivium, they were considered ready to pursue one of the 3 higher faculties: theology, law, or medicine. Theology, the study of divine things, was often considered the queen of the sciences. To understand complex theological doctrines, to interpret Scripture, and to engage in deep philosophical debates about God and humanity, a student needed a razor-sharp mind trained in logic and rhetoric. They needed the precision of grammar to understand ancient texts. A theologian might spend years dissecting the arguments of Thomas Aquinas or Peter Lombard, a task only possible with a robust foundation and dialectical reasoning. Law, the study of justice and governance, also relied heavily on the liberal arts. Lawyers and legal scholars needed to understand precise definitions as taught in grammar, and to construct compelling arguments, a direct application of logic and rhetoric. Roman law revived in many medieval universities, presented complex cases and precedents that demanded careful textual analysis and logical deduction. Records from the University of Bologna, a famous law school, indicate students often spent a decade mastering these intricate legal frameworks. Medicine, the study of the human body and its ailments, although sometimes viewed as more practical, also benefited immensely. Knowledge of arithmetic and geometry was useful for understanding proportions in anatomy or for preparing medical compounds, while direct application of the quadrivium was less common than the trivium. The systematic thinking fostered by all 7 arts was vital for diagnosis and treatment. The ultimate purpose of the liberal arts, then, was to create learned individuals capable of engaging with the highest intellectual pursuits of their time, individuals who could contribute to the spiritual, legal, and physical well-being of their communities. Number 11. From student to master, the path to knowledge. The journey through the 7 liberal arts was a long and demanding one, often stretching over many years. It was not a casual pursuit, but a rigorous intellectual apprenticeship. Students typically began their studies in their early teens, sometimes as young as 14, though older students were also common. They started with the trivium, spending years perfecting their skills in grammar, logic, and rhetoric. This initial stage was typically completed in 5 to 7 years, depending on the individual's aptitude and the particular university or cathedral school. Upon successful completion of the trivium, a student would typically earn the degree of Bachelor of Arts. This marked a significant milestone. They had proven their command of the foundational arts of expression and reason, but the path did not end there. To become a Master of Arts, which qualified them to teach, students had to delve into the quadrivium. This advanced stage involved another 2 to 3 years of intense study in arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. The transition from bachelor to master was often marked by a public disputation, a formal academic debate where the student had to defend a thesis against the challenging questions of their professors and fellow scholars. A student named Roger Bacon, a notable scholar of the 13th century, was known for his fierce intellectual battles during such disputations, puting his mastery of logic and rhetoric. Becoming a Master of Arts meant that a scholar was considered fully proficient in all 7 liberal arts and was authorized to teach them. This was a crucial role, as these masters formed the backbone of the universities, passing on the ancient knowledge to new generations of students, ensuring the continuous flow of learning and the perpetuation of the intellectual tradition. Number 10. the daily grind of a medieval scholar. Life as a medieval student was far from a modern campus experience. There were no comfortable dorms, no coffee shops, and certainly no internet. A scholar's daily routine was one of rigorous discipline and intellectual labor. Often in cold, dimly lit halls, days began early, frequently before dawn, with attendance at morning prayers. Classes known as lectio, or reading, involved a master reading aloud from a text, often in Latin, and then commenting on it. Students would meticulously copy down notes, sometimes on wax tablets or parchment, to be reviewed later. Textbooks were rare and expensive. Students often shared copies or made their own by hand, leading to a vibrant, if slow, system of knowledge transmission. The focus was on listening, memorization, and repetitive practice. Typical day might include several hours of lectures, followed by disputations or debates, where students actively engaged in logical arguments, honing their skills in dialectic. Records from the University of Paris in the 13th century describe students spending entire afternoons in these often heated intellectual contests. Meal times were simple, often communal, and usually accompanied by more readings or discussions. Evenings were dedicated to private study, copying texts, reviewing notes, and preparing for the next day's lessons. There was little leisure time. Social life often revolved around intellectual camaraderie and the occasional boisterous debate outside the classroom. Punishments for idleness or misconduct were strict, emphasizing the seriousness of their academic pursuit. The life of a medieval scholar was one of continuous intellectual engagement, demanding immense dedication and a deep commitment to the acquisition of knowledge. It was a life built around the very arts they sought to master. Number 9. Astronomy. Reading the celestial map. Astronomy was the final and arguably most awe-inspiring art of the quadrivium. It was far more than simply looking at stars. It was about understanding the grand, intricate design of the cosmos itself. For medieval scholars, the universe was seen as a perfectly ordered creation, and the movements of the celestial bodies were a direct expression of that divine order. Studying astronomy was a way to understand God's magnificent plan. Students of astronomy learned about the Ptolemaic model of the universe, which placed the Earth at the center with the sun, moon, and planets orbiting it in a series of complex spheres. They memorized the names of constellations, the paths of the planets, and the cycles of the moon. Text like Ptolemy's Almagest, a vast astronomical treatise originally from the 2nd century AD and translated into Latin from Arabic sources, served as key guides. Medieval scholars pored over its intricate calculations and diagrams. This art had practical applications as well. An accurate understanding of celestial movements was crucial for timekeeping, for developing and maintaining calendars, and for determining the precise dates of religious festivals like Easter. Astrolabes, complex brass instruments, were used by scholars to calculate the positions of stars and planets, to determine local time, and even to survey land. Records from scholars like Michael Scott in the 13th century describe the use of such instruments to predict celestial events. The pursuit of astronomy was a blend of meticulous observation, complex mathematical calculation, and profound philosophical contemplation, revealing the beauty and order of the universe and connecting the earthly realm to the divine. Number 8. Music. The secret language of harmony. In the medieval liberal arts curriculum, music was not primarily about performance or learning to play an instrument, although many scholars did engage with musical practice. Instead, it was an art focused on the theoretical understanding of harmony, proportion, and number. It was seen as the audible manifestation of the same mathematical relationships that governed the entire cosmos. Music was a branch of mathematics, a way of understanding the universe through sound. Students learned about the mathematical ratios that created harmonious intervals such as the octave, the fifth, and the fourth. They explored how these ratios could be expressed numerically. The foundational text for this study was often Boethius's De Institutiono Musica, a 6th century work that explained the philosophical and mathematical underpinnings of music. This text divided music into 3 categories: musica mundana, or the music of the spheres, the harmony of the universe itself; musica humana, or the harmony within the human body and soul; and musica instrumentalis, or audible music produced by voices or instruments. The study involved understanding modes, scales, and the properties of sound waves. Scholars spent time analyzing chant melodies, not just for their beauty, but for their underlying mathematical structure. They investigated how different pitches and intervals related to one another, much like a mathematician examines numerical relationships. The aim was to grasp the universal principles of order and proportion that resonated through everything, from the smallest interval to the grand cosmic dance of the planets. Music, therefore, was a key to unlocking the numerical harmonies that pervaded creation. Number 7. Arithmetic, more than just counting. Arithmetic, the first of the quadrivium arts, went far beyond simple counting or basic sums. For medieval scholars, arithmetic was the study of numbers themselves, their properties, and their philosophical significance. It was considered the purest form of knowledge, as numbers were seen as the fundamental building blocks of all existence. Before a student could understand geometry, music, or astronomy, they first had to grasp the abstract world of number. Students delved into theories of odd and even numbers, prime numbers, perfect numbers, and triangular numbers. They explored the relationships between numbers, not just for practical calculations, but for the inherent beauty and order they revealed. Classical text often used was Boethius's De Institutione Arithmetica, a 6th century work that drew heavily from earlier Greek thinkers like Nicomachus of Gerasa. This book introduced students to number theory and the abstract qualities of numerical relationships. Calculations were often performed using abaci, or by hand, a slow and painstaking process compared to modern methods. But the true focus was not on speed of calculation, but on understanding the underlying principles. Scholars debated the nature of infinity, the concept of zero, and the mystical properties attributed to certain numbers. For example, the number 7 held particular significance, appearing in the 7 liberal arts themselves, the 7 days of creation, and other symbolic contexts. Arithmetic was seen as the key to understanding the order of the cosmos, providing the framework for all other scientific and philosophical inquiries. It was the language of ultimate truth. Number 6. The Great Divide, Trivium and Quadrivium. The 7 liberal arts were traditionally divided into 2 distinct groups, forming a logical progression of study. These groups were known as the Trivium and the Quadrivium. This division was not arbitrary. It represented a carefully thought-out sequence of learning, building from foundational skills to more complex understandings. The Trivium, literally meaning the 3 roads or 3 ways, comprised grammar, logic, and rhetoric. These were considered the elementary arts, focusing on the tools of expression and thought. A medieval educator named Marcianus Capella, in his 5th century work, The Marriage of Philology and Mercury, famously personified these arts, laying out their role in the educational journey. Trivium was about learning to read, write, understand, and speak clearly and persuasively. It was the gate to all further learning, the bedrock upon which all other knowledge rested. Mastering the Trivium prepared the mind to process and communicate information effectively. Once a student had a firm grasp of the Trivium, they advanced to the Quadrivium, meaning the four roads or four ways. This group consisted of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. These were considered the advanced arts, dealing with quantity and number in various forms. They were seen as the mathematical arts, revealing the order and harmony of the universe. While the Trivium taught students how to understand and express truth, the Quadrivium taught them how to discover the truths of the physical and celestial world through numerical and spatial relationships. The journey through the 7 arts was thus a methodical ascent, beginning with the mastery of language and reason, and culminating in the understanding of the mathematical principles that governed the cosmos. Number 5. Rhetoric. Persuading the public, shaping the world. After grammar and logic, students moved to rhetoric, the art of persuasive communication and eloquent expression. If grammar taught how to speak correctly and logic how to think correctly, rhetoric taught how to speak and write effectively and convincingly. This was a crucial skill in a society where public discourse, sermons, and legal arguments played significant roles. Students of rhetoric studied the techniques of famous orators from antiquity, particularly the works of Cicero and Quintilian. They analyzed speeches for their structure, their emotional impact, and their logical appeal. Lessons involved memorizing and delivering speeches, practicing various stylistic devices like metaphor and simile, and learning how to tailor an argument to a specific audience. Common exercise involved taking a legal case or a moral dilemma and preparing a persuasive argument for one side, complete with opening statements, points of evidence, and a compelling conclusion. Records from the University of Paris in the 14th century show regular public debates where students applied their rhetorical skills to complex issues. Rhetoric encompassed understanding different types of speeches, such as deliberative, judicial, and epidictic speeches, each with its own purpose and structure. It also involved understanding the power of language to move and influence. Scholars often practiced by composing letters, sermons, and official documents, ensuring clarity, elegance, and persuasive force. The ability to articulate complex ideas with precision and conviction was not just an academic exercise. It was a pathway to influence in the church, in law, and in political life, allowing individuals to shape public opinion and contribute to the legal and moral debates of their time. Number 4. Logic. The art of thinking straight. Once a student had mastered the rules of grammar, they moved on to logic, sometimes called dialect. This was the art of clear and correct reasoning, the systematic study of valid arguments and truth. Logic was seen as the tool to discern truth from falsehood, to analyze complex statements, and to engage in intellectual debate. It was the ultimate mental workout for a medieval scholar. Students of logic immersed themselves in the works of Aristotle, particularly his Organon, a collection of treatises on logic. They learned about concepts like propositions, categories, and, most importantly, syllogisms. A syllogism is a form of logical argument that applies deductive reasoning to arrive at a conclusion based on 2 or more propositions asserted or assumed to be true. For example, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Students spent hours diagramming and evaluating such arguments, identifying fallacies, and constructing their own sound lines of reasoning. Debate, known as disputation, was a central part of learning. Logic. Students would engage in formal arguments with their peers and masters, presenting a thesis, defending it against objections, and responding to challenges. These disputations were rigorous and often intense intellectual contests where quick thinking and a mastery of logical principles were paramount. A student named Albertus Magnus, a 13th century scholar, was renowned for his profound logical reasoning in debates. The goal was not necessarily to win an argument by any means, but to arrive at the truth through rigorous intellectual exchange. Mastering logic meant developing a disciplined mind, capable of analyzing complex problems, building coherent arguments, and identifying flawed reasoning, skills that were essential for any serious intellectual pursuit, especially in theology. Number 3. Grammar. Mastering the mother tongue of learning. Grammar was the very first step in the medieval educational journey, the fundamental gateway to all other knowledge. It was not simply about correcting misplaced commas. It was the rigorous study of Latin, the universal language of scholarship, religion, and administration across medieval Europe. Without a complete command of Latin, a student could not hope to read the ancient texts that held the wisdom of the past, nor could they engage in the intellectual life of the university. Students began by memorizing vast numbers of Latin declensions and conjugations, the various endings that change nouns, verbs, and adjectives. They learned about the different parts of speech, sentence, structure, and the intricacies of Latin syntax. Textbooks like the Ars Minor by Donatus, a 4th century Roman grammarian, or the more extensive Institutiones Grammaticae by Priscian, a 6th century grammarian, were staple materials. These books provided the rules and examples that students drilled daily. Lessons involved extensive rote memorization, repetitive recitation, and copying texts. Students were expected to translate passages from Latin into their vernacular language and, more importantly, to compose their own Latin sentences and paragraphs. A student in a medieval classroom might spend years dissecting the poetry of Virgil or the prose of Cicero, not just for their literary value, but for their perfect grammatical structure. Cards from medieval cathedral schools in the 11th and 12th centuries described students engaging in dictationes, where a master would read a text and students would write it down, often correcting their own grammar errors in the process. The purpose of grammar was to instill an absolute mastery of Latin, enabling students to read, write, and comprehend the complex academic and theological texts that formed the core of medieval learning. It was the essential key to unlocking the world of knowledge. Number 2. A glimpse into medieval minds. Imagine walking into a classroom not filled with laptops and projectors, but with students huddled over parchment scrolls illuminated by flickering candlelight. This was the scene for scholars in medieval universities and cathedral schools. For many centuries, from roughly the 6th to the 15th century, a specific set of 7 disciplines formed the core of what was considered a truly educated person. These were known as the 7 liberal arts. The word liberal here did not mean politically progressive. It meant arts worthy of a free man, distinguishing them from manual or vocational trades. These arts were not random subjects. They were seen as a ladder of knowledge, a structured path to intellectual development. They were believed to teach not just facts, but the fundamental ways of thinking and understanding the world. Students learned how to use language with precision, how to reason logically, how to persuade others, and how to understand the mathematical harmonies that underpin the entire universe. Historical records like the curricula outline for the University of Paris in the 13th century clearly show the strict progression through these arts. Who were these students? They were mostly young men, often from noble families, or those destined for careers in the church, law, or medicine. They gathered in bustling intellectual centers like Paris, Bologna, Oxford, and Salerno. Their pursuit was not just for a job. It was for a comprehensive understanding of God's creation and humanity's place within it. These 7 arts were the essential mental tools, the framework for all higher learning. equipping students with the intellectual abilities they would need to navigate complex theological debates, legal arguments, or the intricacies of the natural world. Number 1. The core of medieval higher learning. In the long stretch of time known as the Middle Ages, intellectual pursuit looked very different from today's sprawling universities. Yet, the foundational ideas of higher education were meticulously structured around a set of 7 key disciplines. These were not optional electives, they were the very backbone of learning, considered essential for any truly educated person. These 7 disciplines, often referred to collectively as the 7 liberal arts, formed the curriculum for centuries in Europe's most influential educational institutions, from the great cathedral schools to the burgeoning universities. The idea was to provide students with a comprehensive intellectual toolkit, a set of mental skills that would allow them to engage with the world's complexities. The ultimate goal was not just to accumulate facts, but to cultivate wisdom, to understand the truth, and to articulate it effectively. This system of education was deeply rooted in ancient Greek and Roman thought, preserved and refined by scholars throughout the early medieval period. Figures like Boethius, a Roman philosopher from the 6th century, were instrumental in translating and transmitting these classical ideas, creating textbooks that would be used for hundreds of years. Imagine a time when knowledge was hard-won, copied by hand, and debated face-to-face. In this environment, the way one learned was as important as what one learned. The 7 liberal arts provided that method. They were divided into 2 main groups, each building upon the last, guiding the student from the very basics of language and reason to the profound mathematical and cosmological understandings of their time. Curriculum reflected a deep belief in the order of the universe and the power of human intellect to comprehend that order. These arts were the bedrock upon which the entire intellectual life of the medieval world was built.